My name is Yashoda Sharma. I am the Program Director at the Digital Medicine Society. We are excited to share some resources and insights on driving inclusion in digital health measurement product development and deployment. Collaborative communities, collaborative communities are a priority from FDA's Center for Diagnostic and Radiological Health. DATAcc is a community of interdisciplinary experts from across the healthcare continuum, with a mission to develop best practices to advance the use of digital health measurements to improve health outcomes for everyone. The resources we're sharing today are a culmination of some extraordinary work by our 46 member organizations over the past year. DATAcc is hosted by the Digital Medicine Society, a global nonprofit dedicated to advancing safe, effective, equitable, and ethical use of digital health products to optimize human health. DIME was launched in May 2019. We just celebrated our 3-year anniversary about 2 weeks ago. Healthcare and technology grew up separately. DIME was created to sit at the intersection of healthcare and technology to help drive digital medicine. Our advisory and leadership boards reflect these expertise, in addition to fully representing the healthcare continuum, including patients, researchers, industry, and government. Our global membership reach also contributes to these expertise. We have members in 6 continents across 59 countries. Together, we deliver clinical quality work on a tech timeline through research, communication and education, and especially through community building. It is with great honor that I speak on behalf of the DATAcc members, and I welcome you today. We are proud to present the first set of open access resources designed to ensure that digital health measurement products are developed and deployed with and for all individuals who can benefit from them. Today, you will hear from DATAcc steering committee and project team members. Before we start, a few quick housekeeping notes in case this is your first DIME webinar. We are recording, and the recording will be available after the event. We welcome and encourage discussion. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your Zoom hand and we will invite you to ask your questions live, or you can post your questions in the Q&A box. This is why you are here today, to hear from experts. We have a really nice program plan. First, we will discuss DATAcc and the promise of digital health measurements to improve lives for everyone. Then we will chat with a few members from the steering committee. They will tell you how inclusivity became the first priority. And then we dive into the products, beginning with driving inclusion in the development of digital health measurement products. We will share some insights on the development toolkit, and you will have the opportunity to ask some questions. Then we will discuss operationalizing inclusion and provide some insights on the value of these tools in deployment. You will also have an opportunity to ask questions about these products. And we will close with some details on what is next for DATAcc and how you can get involved. And we will invite you to ask any additional questions. As healthcare looks to digital health technologies to transform care, special attention has been given to understanding how these digital health measurements will improve lives. I would like to welcome Annie Saha, Assistant Director at the FDA's Digital Health Center of Excellence, and Jennifer Golsack, DIME CEO, to share their thoughts and insights. Jen, I will turn it over to you.
Fantastic, Yashoda. Thank you so much for A terrific introduction here. Hi there, folks. My name's Jen Goltak. I'm the CEO here at the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. We are absolutely delighted to host DATAcc, or the Digital Health Measurement Collaborative Community. Before we dive into this conversation, I do have to pause and thank the 46 extraordinary organizations who have been at the table with us over the last year. Yashoda and Jean, for your leadership of this initiative and this work effort. And Annie, it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Your partnership has been best in class as we set up the community and as we embarked on this bold body of work to create the resources that we launched today. Annie, I couldn't do an introduction justice. So do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to folks on the line who may not know you?
Sure, thank you. And I'll just echo sentiments. We at FDA have been really excited to have joined the DATAcc as members and really seeing the diverse perspectives and the tools being launched today. For those who don't know me, I'm Annie Saha. I'm Assistant Director in our Digital Health Center of Excellence at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at FDA. I focus a lot in terms of thinking about how we incorporate the patient perspective in our decision-making in terms of how digital health can really ultimately improve health outcomes, looking at strategic partnerships, how do we advance the science behind how we assess digital health technologies, and sort of some other work in terms of operations for the Center of Excellence, so we can serve as a resource both within the agency as well as externally.
Fantastic. And Annie, I've learned so much from you and your leadership and the way that you are able to bring together these different stakeholders and how instrumental the Center for Digital, I'm going to get this the right way around for you, the Digital Health Center of Excellence has become so quickly as being that linchpin connecting all of these different stakeholder groups, both externally to and internally within FDA. Annie, before we start in today, we talk about DATAcc, the CC, demarcating that collaborative community. Tell us a little bit about the history of the collaborative community model, how it fits into a CDRH strategy for folks who may not know.
Yeah, absolutely. So the concept of collaborative communities came out of our strategic priorities from 2018 to 2020, and really recognizing that there's a lot of areas that intersect healthcare and medical devices that are really beyond FDA's purview or that we can't solve alone. And clearly, as you'll be hearing about the tools today, that digital measurement and inclusion is really something it's not an FDA specific issue. It's not any one of the 46 member organization issues, but really that you need to bring together a wide variety of stakeholders, really leverage different groups and different perspectives to be able to move the needle. And also recognizing the idea with a collaborative community is that you're really trying to solve some of the most challenging aspects of a certain area, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether in this case it's digital measurement, clinical trial diversity across the board, that you really need to bring together different stakeholders. And it's not going to be a one-off project that's going to, a be-all, end-all sort of solution to any one thing, but there needs to also be sort of a sustained effort over time. We're really bringing together the community and continuing to build over time. And I certainly see that happening with the DATAcc work.
Fantastic. For what my opinion's worth, and obviously I've got a tremendous amount of bias here, I think it's a terrific model. And having seen it play out over the last year, and as you said, the ability to bring in new stakeholders, it's been absolutely excellent. I think digital health measurement has been an area of focus for DIME since we launched. This idea that now new tools are available, new analytic approaches to really redefine health and disease and to add insights and information that we've never been able to capture before. I think what's terrific about DATAcc and the reason that this partnership is so important vis-a-vis digital health measurement is that transcends the regulated and the non-regulated environment. And so what we're able to do here is think about harmonization of best practice so that we aren't creating new silos going forward in our ability to use tools, some of which will have claims that raise to the level of your oversight, some won't. But as we think about why are we excited about these tools in the toolbox? And in fact, the very mission of DATAcc to ensure that we achieve the promise of digital health measurement to improve lives for everyone, I think it's a really, really terrific model. And we've seen that be borne out over the last year. Annie, when we think about the projects that we tackled here, I'm incredibly proud of this team. And you'll remember what was probably 11 months or so ago now when we were kicking the tires on what are the most important issues that we need to tackle as our inaugural projects here at DATAcc. Together, the community decided that it had to be inclusion, right? The rest of it, and there are other issues that we have to address, and we will get to those as DATAcc continues, but it's table stakes that we bring everyone with us. And so we had to start with a focus on inclusion. You've also been doing some fantastic work over the last year at CDRH vis-a-vis diversity and inclusion. Can you tell us a little bit about those strategies and how they may dovetail with our work and resources here at DATAcc?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of a nice dovetail between our strategic priority efforts on collaborative communities as well as health equity, because we really see collaborative communities as a way to advance our goals, ensuring that patients in the U.S. have access to high quality, safe and effective medical devices. And then, of course, thinking about it from that health equity perspective, that ultimately no person should be excluded from healthcare, and that no patient should really be left behind. And so when we're thinking about digital health, especially, technology has the opportunity, also has the opportunity in both ways, both to improve health, but it could also divide us. And so really, we want to try to see where we can bridge that gap through collaborations, and also our work internally, whether it's through the draft guidance that was put out by FDA across the medical product centers on diversity, inclusion, and clinical trials, thinking about how to leverage digital health technologies for use in clinical investigations, again, another cross sort of center effort within FDA. And then, ultimately, there are aspects that we can do in terms of how can we at FDA drive the use of digital technologies that can improve health when they can, bridge the gap and go directly to the patients where they are, whether that's at a city, rural, different age, race, ethnicity, and really try to facilitate that opportunity. But, with that, we also do want to ensure that we're not creating more of a digital divide, because that's sort of the antithesis of what we're trying to do from a health equity perspective.
Annie, I think you touched on something incredibly important there. The thing that I find myself reminding folks, and frankly myself often, is that digital tools, in this case, we're focused on digital health measurement tools, are inanimate objects. They aren't going to solve anything or make anything worse independently of our activities and our actions. And I think you're exactly right. And I think this marks a moment in our field. We are at a fork in the road. Do we continue to grow and mature this industry in such a way that these tools are developed and deployed such that they ameliorate many of these longstanding health disparities? Or do we fail to take that action? Do we depend on the tool as the silver bullet, the widget, to solve these problems and proceed forward? And, perhaps at best, if we go down that road, maintain a status quo, which is frankly unacceptable, or at worst, as you said, perhaps make things worse along the digital divide. Going back to what this community released today, I think it's this very intentional push of the field towards that path whereby we insist that this moment of innovation takes everyone with us, that we do things better than before. And what I think is really interesting about these resources, and folks on the line, we're going to dive into them in much more detail today, is the inclusion of the market opportunity calculator. When we think about the need for incentives, I'll make a bold statement and say I think that's oftentimes overlooked by pre-competitive collaborations, that oftentimes we think it's enough to put the resources out into the world without the reason to action those. Annie, I think about sitting in your seat, and I think constantly, especially right now where the field is moving very quickly, folks look to you to provide all of those incentives. Now, we've provided, I hope, very strong business incentives to do this kind of work. And in fact, folks can actually go in and calculate the magnitude of that incentive using this tool. But you've also got some really interesting draft guidance slated for release this year, I believe, around fast tracking some tools that really are intended to ameliorate some health disparities. Am I correct in thinking that? And could you tell us a little bit more about that planned guidance?
So we do have on our guidance, I believe, A and B list is what we call it, about what are breakthrough technologies that could sort of impact or improve health equity and sort of exacerbate or to sort of promote health equity and sort of reduce disparities. Not much more, but hopefully sometime in the near future to come. But to the point about sort of the business model and other things, that's exactly sort of the point of us joining collaborative communities, is because that's not a tool that we would develop out of FDA. Our job at FDA is not to provide companies why they should invest from a business perspective in equity. We can provide sort of the policy levers and we're thinking from a regulatory perspective, but that's exactly why we need collaborative communities and to be able to bring different stakeholders to think about some of those other aspects of business models that are within our wheelhouse.
That's exactly right. And, you guys do extraordinary work. You provide tremendous guidance. I think the accessibility of the field to FDA right now to have these conversations in this rapidly growing space is, absolutely phenomenal. And you cannot do all of those things. Those business incentives are wildly out of scope. So how can we put that together? And what I'm excited about right now is it almost feels like there's an exciting moment in time. We see the accessibility for broadband getting pushed through. We see the strategies that FDA is driving. You think about the puzzle pieces that we're able to release today around why to do this. Why is there an imperative to do this work? Not just because it's the right thing to do, but there's actually strong business incentives to do this. And here's all of the resources that you need in order to capture that value. It does feel like we are at a watershed moment where we could really drive folks down this pathway and insist that this is not a nice to have, but a need to have going forward as we continue to expand our use of digital health measurement to improve how we care for people. Annie, it's been a roller coaster of a year. We've done an awful lot of work in this time. Tell us a little bit about what you enjoyed most about participating in this community and with the 46 organizations that have been at the table with us.
Yes, it certainly has, especially we've done this all remotely and virtually on top of all of that. But, to me, I think the most rewarding and obviously, of course, seeing some of the ultimate outcomes today with the actual toolkits coming out, but really the conversations that everyone's really brought together and the different resources and the different perspectives everyone brings to bear. Some of the really great things I think that the collaborative community has done is some of the workshopping where it's tough for people to sit down for 4 hours in a day, but to really delve in and spend the time, the brainstorming, and really digging into the problem rather than just sort of talking about it at the high level. And I think that's been a real hallmark of everyone who's been engaged in the DATAcc, and credit to you and Jean and Yashoda and the DIME team as well.
Yashoda and Jean, absolutely. They've been absolutely phenomenal leads of this effort. So Annie, I appreciate you recognizing them. Before we wrap, let's think about the collaborative community model. It's not intended to be a simple one and done endeavor. As we celebrate our 1-year anniversary, we are gearing up to welcome new members. We're thinking about the other work that we must do in addition to driving inclusion to continue to ensure that the promise of digital health measurement is realized for everyone. What do you see as the landscape, Annie? What gets you excited as we think about the coming year vis-a-vis digital health measurement?
I think it's continuing to really understand, I think to your point earlier, that the technologies themselves are sort of the inanimate objects, but there's so much data and information that's coming from them. So how can we actually leverage that and use it, that people, whether it's a person in their day-to-day life to manage their health and lifestyle, whether it's us at FDA, being able to use that information to make some kind of regulatory decision, or a clinician in terms of understanding how to help care for their patients, or a shared decision-making conversation, that it's really that insights and really how do we leverage all the information that's coming from it so that ultimately the information from the digital health technology is going to be helpful and impactful in terms of better outcomes.
Fantastic. Annie, I'm not going to pile anything else on there. I think that is a fantastic vision and call to action for the coming year. Annie, thank you both personally and on behalf of DATAcc and DIME for your leadership, for your partnership, and for your trust in what this team can do. I'm very proud of what we've delivered. I look forward to doing much more together, and it is an absolute joy to be in this with you. So thank you for everything, and I'm delighted that you were able to join us this morning.
Thank you, and we look forward to continuing on as members.
Fantastic. Annie, what a terrific conversation. And I'm excited to move on and start diving into some of the resources today. So with that, I will ask my colleagues Celine Marquez, Ernest Moy, and Bray Patrick Lake to join me on stage. It all seems a little silly that we continue to use this in-person language. Annie and I were joking about not tripping on our way up to the stage earlier. Before we go ahead and dive in, there's actually a really terrific question in the chat that I would be remiss if I didn't address. There's a really good question asking us to define digital health measurement. That does seem important in the context of our conversations today. So when we talk about digital health measurement, we are thinking about the use of sensors and other digitally generated data to provide information about someone's health. It's really important as we think about the history of DATAcc that we didn't, for example, select the remote patient monitoring collaborative community or even the remote patient monitoring. Both of those terms infer that the center and the locus of all activity is the clinic or the trial site. And that's not the case. When we think about these new flows of data, whether it's the OnStar system in your car that knows how much you weigh and where you go every evening after work, whether it's very highly regulated implantable cardiac devices, whether it's the way we type into our smartphones, these are all digital measures of health that provide enormously insightful information. What we have to do is make sure that we harness that information in a way that is valuable, that we harness it in a way that is safe, that is effective for medical decision-making and is equitable and brings everyone with us. So that's the goal of the work here at DATAcc. And I'm really glad you posed that question. And I apologize I didn't get to that first. All right. You've all heard a lot from me today, so let me hand the mic. This is an extraordinary panel, and I would not do you justice if I tried to introduce you myself. So I'll do a quick whip round. Bray, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, Bray Patrick Lake. I'm a senior director in the strategic partnerships group at Evidation Health.
Fantastic. Welcome, Bray, and thank you for being part of DATAcc this year. Celine, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Celine Marquez, and I'm Global Medical Director for Digital Technologies at Genentech. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us, Celine. Ernest, go ahead, please.
I'm Ernie Moy. I'm a general internist, and I'm the Executive Director of the Veterans Health Administration Office of Health Equity.
Fantastic. Bray, Celine, Annie, thank you for being with us today. And I think it's a really nice sense that folks on the line will get when we look at your respective organizations and your expertise of the kind of different viewpoints we bring together here at DATAcc. Celine, I'd love to come to you first. For folks who may not be aware of the DATAcc structure, as Annie and I were discussing, it's a longitudinal community. It has a steering committee that helps us identify the most pressing challenges in the field, share ideas, best practice, be thought partners, be leaders in the field. Part of that role is to determine what the priorities are that we should be tackling with the kind of action-oriented resources we launched today. Celine, tell us a little bit about what are we excited about on behalf of the steering committee? What's in the mix vis-a-vis digital health measurement?
Thanks, Jennifer, and hi to DATAcc and friends, and thanks for allowing me to talk on behalf of the steering committee. We're super excited about coming together to solve these problems that just can't be solved in silos. The complexity of the problems requires that, and specifically, we're thinking about how can we ensure that everyone can optimally benefit from this technology. And as a committee, we want to ensure that digital products that are being developed right now are trustworthy. They're deployed in ways that ensure that everyone can get access to them and can benefit. And fundamentally, that the data that they produce is capable of generating high quality evidence. And this is really critical. We know that with the digitization of medicine, that means that harm might be scaled quickly. And we know that the risk of digital medicine is that it could widen health disparities. So we don't want to leave people behind who might stand to gain and benefit from it. And so we saw this play out in COVID. The very devices that we use to triage COVID patients are flawed. Uncorrected pulse oximetry data overestimates arterial blood gas and dark skin. And so we realized quickly that even if somehow we could eliminate unconscious bias, we'd still have this problem of inadequate care for people of color because our devices don't work for everybody. And the data they produced can be systematically biased or precisely wrong and scaled. So think about that. Even in the hands of an unbiased practitioner, we can still have bias perpetuated. let that sink in. So we didn't come together intending to be a group where we first decided to focus on inclusion, but that is where our data-driven approach led us. And we thought that was the most rational starting point. And I'll just say too, sort of double click on what Annie was sharing, it's been really amazing, very cool to see a bunch of different colleagues from all these different types of organizations, startups, tech, pharma, regulators, payers, community organizers. These are all super unique people who love to solve problems at this intersection of medicine and tech and data to improve health. And what's cool is that these hybrid experts didn't exist 10 years ago. And this is the first large scale mashup of digital inclusion ecosystem and this digital medicine ecosystem. And so, together we're sort of remodeling the traditional approach to digital development and deployment. And we hope this is going to lead to better patient engagement, better clinical decisions and outcomes for patients. And the potential for this work is super exciting for all of us.
It is indeed, and I think everyone's going to get a t-shirt with large scale mashup on it. That is absolutely phenomenal. But Celine, in all seriousness, because these are important topics here, you spoke about the need to be trustworthy. And I remember from some of the workshops, and Annie mentioned the workshops that drove a lot of the materials that we released today, and we talked about what it means to gain trust, right? And we talked about that it's incredibly hard to gain, and it's also incredibly fragile and easy to lose. And I'm actually looking at Tom's question here in the chat. How are we thinking about those individuals who maybe don't trust these measures yet? We have to be cognizant of that. We haven't lost trust yet in digital health measurement. We are at a very important juncture where we can build it right, and we can bring people with us. So I'm delighted you brought that up. And I'm proud that you underscored how courageous the team was in insisting that we tackled inclusion first. Celine, tell us what else was on that shortlist, because while this is critically important, there is more we must do. What else have we been thinking about as a steering committee?
Sure. So some of the other topics we've looked at were algorithms in digital tools. So in particular, the sort of machine learning flavor, along with kind of all of the sort of prerequisites to trustworthy machine learning. So even if we didn't have this data gap, which we know is created by these exclusive practices in development and implementation of devices, in order to have trustworthy machine learning, we need better data standards, we need better harmonization of data quality, data privacy, which is non-orthogonal to data integrity and access. So all of these data topics are germane to high quality evidence generation with our digital tools. And it's important to know, because data is not found, it's created. And it's created by flawed humans who decide what data to collect and in what context to collect it. And we design data structures that are acted upon then by algorithms that we have created. So even if you say, well, okay, computers are now designing the data structures and algorithms. Well, we are still the ones who select the variables to consider in those models, and still the ones who decide in what context we're going to collect those variables. So every single step along the way of these sort of computational process where humans are involved, we have the potential to impact and have systematic errors and random errors, which can mislead us from the truth. So if we want to generate, high quality evidence with these tools, we have to get the data right all along the data pathway. And so we're in the middle right now of the process of selecting our next topic. So stay tuned for that.
Fantastic, Celine, what a terrific overview. And it's all about the data. The digitization of healthcare isn't about widgets, it's about data and it's about information. And I think that is incredibly important. Ray, I'd love to come to you. Celine's outlined a tapestry of things that this community needs to dig into over time. And yet we chose inclusion, and we chose two simultaneous projects, right? That we hope would be more than the sum of the parts. We didn't just do development or just do the deployment of these tools. We chose both. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think this was absolutely critical. And we've highlighted a bit of this of, the diversity of our stakeholders, which is incredibly, it's a huge strength of the collaborative, but it just brings together all of these different ends of what it takes to develop a digital health measure and product, and then who's actually deploying that. And those are actually two different communities of stakeholders. So what is exciting is that this group just kind of slowed down a little. And I'll share, my background was in running patient advocacy foundations. I later went to academic medicine, and then I was running large scale national research programs. And I'm very much from the camp of like time equals lives. Let's speed this up. But now I work in health tech, and I'm telling you, we live in dog years. So while it is exciting to see everything that's being developed and all the creative minds are bringing solutions to impact some of these great and urgent healthcare problems in the US that we have patients in need, it's a little scary at the same time because of that diversity of lenses. So if you're coming from academic medicine, you probably know about community engagement. You've probably been exposed to that somewhere in your medical program. If you're coming from tech, maybe not. If you're an engineer, even if you're working in venture capital. And so I just think it was so important that this community said, let's slow down for just a second and then put together this immense body of work that I'm incredibly proud of. I think this 1 year and what this collaborative has developed is going to be serving us and saving us really 10 years of not getting it right. So I just think the whole community was like, whoa, 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 like let's step back. And like, if we don't get this right, and this is inclusion, then all of the other things that we do are not going to have the impact that they could. So, yeah.
Great, +1 to absolutely everything you say. And I think that's really important, this idea that this had to come first. What we've seen often in our field is we take a half step and then it becomes ossified. We had to get this right straight out of the gate so that we weren't spending, as you said, the next 10 years, the next several decades trying to unwind this and figure out how to bring all of the people we left behind with us. You talked a lot about the terrific decision-making of this team to go here first and also to take that breath and make sure we did it right. Why was this community uniquely positioned to do that?
I think we're all like, I love coming to this community because I don't get to interact with these people in my daily job. And so we're all creating solutions, but to be able to say, this is what it looks like from my world, or, this is what it looks like when I take this tool and I try to deploy it within a community. This is what we need, to work with the community to understand their needs. Like, these are unique perspectives that you don't get unless you work in a collaborative community like this. And so I feel grateful that this community got formed, and thanks again to FDA for supporting this.
Indeed, we are very lucky to have that support. I think it really ensures that we have all of the brains that we need to at the table to do this kind of work. Ernie, I want to come to you. You hold an important and influential position at VHA. You are Executive Director of the Office for Health Equity. Tell us about your vantage point vis-a-vis the use of digital health technologies in improving care and how it's helping us be more inclusive and making sure that every veteran that you care for has access to the highest quality care.
Sure. So again, it's delightful to be part of this particular activity. In my office, inclusion is everything, but I also think that in VA, inclusion is everything as well, because we don't just take care of some patients, we need to take care of all patients. And in truth, many of the issues that we have experienced result from a lack of attention to inclusion. It affects the digital realm as well. And so in the past, many digital health tools developed at VA did not pay explicit attention to equity. It's not like we said, we're not going to pay attention to this. People didn't think about it, 20 years ago, that we needed to pay attention to this. It was simply not part of the inputs for developing these technologies. And now, as we are smarter, we are routinely assessing our tools from an equity perspective. And what we find is they work better for some patients than they do for others. And that is simply not acceptable. These risk algorithms need to work for all of our patients. And so now we have to go back and adjust our models or replace them entirely. And if we'd paid more explicit attention to digital inclusion during development at the start, we wouldn't be having these kinds of issues now. We will get through them, but it's rework, and I hate rework. I like the separation of development and deployment because we experience even more issues, from a deployment perspective. Explicit attention upfront as these things are being deployed are really important. I'll talk about technology that we have deployed much more recently. Remote temperature monitoring mats. We're using those to identify precursors to pressure ulcers in the souls of veterans with diabetes. If we can detect these risk spots early, we can get the veterans to offload from their feet, and we can prevent these ulcers from developing entirely. Because these are more common among minority and rural veterans, we thought that we would be helping equity by deploying these mats. And as we started to look at what's happening, what we find is this is true for minority veterans. So minority veterans are receiving these mats at comparable rates to white veterans, and so we think this will help with equity issues. But rural veterans who live further from VA facilities, and we think would probably have the most benefit from these mats because of that distance issue, they're receiving mats at a lower rate than urban veterans are. And this could actually make these disparities grow larger because we didn't think about how to deploy these in the optimal way. We did not include equity in that particular process. And so now we're working to ramp up the use of these mats with rural veterans. And again, if we thought about this from the start, the issue of digital inclusion, if we thought about gathering more input from rural veterans themselves about how we could deploy this more effectively to them, we might have avoided this particular problem. So I do really think this inclusion is central to much of the work we do as healthcare providers. And I'm so grateful for this focus on this and the development of these toolkits to help people incorporate inclusion into the development and deployment of these technologies.
Annie, you couldn't have given a better example of why it is not enough to think about developing the perfect tool and or to, in a separate silo, to think about how we deploy these things, that it actually has to be a two-pronged approach. And I applaud you. I imagine warfighters coming home having kept their limbs intact, and the idea that they may lose them due to a chronic condition later in life. Kudos to the hard work you do to making sure that doesn't happen. And certainly I know firsthand, we're very privileged to work with Ryan Vega with another partnership within VA. I know how you prioritize access, efficiency, equity, and effectiveness in everything that you do. Annie, to round us out, as you look ahead, as you think about the growing field of digital health measurement, how do you envisage continuing to employ these sorts of tools and technologies in a way that doesn't require rework, that is right out of the gates each and every time? What's on the horizon for you, Annie?
So I think we've learned a lot about this effort, including through this collaborative, but also separately. The COVID crisis has really brought issues of disparities in equity and inclusion up to the forefront. And we are now trying to readapt our work processes so that inclusion really is upfront. We have full support from our administration and our leadership. And our goal is to integrate it into all the work processes that we do. We should be thinking about equity and inclusion in everything we do from the start to the end to make sure that this works out. And I'll give an example, I think, which is not specifically digital, but reflects the potential benefits of having this inclusive attitude from the very start. And it relates to not a digital technology, but the deployment of a new technology, which was COVID vaccination at VA. And so at the start of the pandemic, we saw that our Black veterans and low-income veterans were being affected at very, very high rates. And so we saw our VA researchers to find out what was happening. What happened during the last pandemic, swine flu? What can we learn to apply to this pandemic? And what they found was that during swine flu, minorities and low-income people had higher case rates because of greater occupational exposure. Not their fault. They couldn't avoid it. This is all occupational exposure. And that they had lower vaccination rates. And this was obviously the worst kind of scenario we could envision. And we were determined not to let this happen again with COVID. We were going to do something to fix this. And so we turned to our secret weapon, which is our veterans themselves. And we convened a panel before vaccination was available of our Black, Hispanic, American, Indian veterans. And we asked them, what can we do? How can we reach you? How can we reach different groups of veterans to make sure that you get the information you need to make a good decision about vaccination? And they told us there are really two key constructs: trust and truth. And we already touched on trust earlier today, but it is central to people using new technologies and including digital technologies. If they don't trust it, they're not going to get it. And so they told us that the vehicle is important. They needed to hear information from someone they trusted. And for them, that was a veteran or another VA provider, and ideally someone who looked like them and that they could relate to. For many, they had to hear about Tuskegee. So I would talk to them and I would say, Tuskegee was unethical, but because people were denied information and treatment, they were not allowed to make a decision for themselves. And in the case of vaccination, it was the exact opposite. We were trying to make sure all veterans had full information so that they could make the right decision for themselves and their families. And they were the deciders, and then VA respected their decision. They also told us they needed to know the truth. They needed to hear numbers and not rhetoric. They wanted to know that large numbers of veterans were included in the vaccine trials, that the effectiveness of the vaccine was high for all groups at preventing disease, hospitalization, and death. And they also wanted vaccination to be easy, quick, and convenient. And in response, VA put out targeted messaging that incorporated all these constructs in print, podcasts, and videos, focusing and targeting outreach to specific audiences. VA cautioned our providers that need to be attentive and sensitive to inclusive issues as we were talking about vaccination and bringing our veterans in. We would identify veterans using our database as they became eligible for vaccination, so they didn't have to worry about themselves. We could call them up and we can schedule a vaccine appointment right there and at the same time if they were agreeable. We also got special permission to vaccinate spouses and caregivers so we could protect the whole household. The result of this intentionality about inclusion is that our minority veterans are actually vaccinated at a higher rate at VA than white veterans. And I think this is a demonstration of what inclusive deployment should look like. Intentionality upfront and then throughout the whole process, and yielding a good outcome.
Annie, what a compelling example, and congratulations for getting that right. It was so important. And I think you've highlighted something that is incredibly important and a terrific note for us to end this particular discussion on, which is it's about the patients and the people that we are here to serve, right? We have new tools in the toolbox. One of them are digital health measurement tools. That's great. We're excited about them, but ultimately we're not going to tech our way out of this. We need to work with people. We need to partner with them. We need to recognize them. And we need to remember that the goal of using these tools is to improve their lives. Absolutely terrific. Bray, Celine, Ernie, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for your leadership of the field, for your participation in this DATAcc community. We've done extraordinary work here. Bray, as you said, I'm confident these tools are going to change the field. I look forward to driving their adoption and doing much more with you next year. So with that, thank you so much. And I'm going to welcome my colleague, Jean Chung, up to the stage here so she can take us on to our next session.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jen. What a great conversation. We're following up here with, really excited to have Ariel Stern as Associate Professor at Harvard Business School. And we're going to kind of dive deep onto the business case behind inclusive design. So with that, Ariel, could you please introduce yourself?
Wonderful. Yes. Thanks so much, Jean. It's great to be here. It's great to be with everyone today and among friends from DIME and beyond. My name is Ariel Stern. I am an associate professor at Harvard Business School. I'm also a visiting scholar at the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Potsdam, Germany, in their Digital Health Center. My research very broadly is around new technologies in healthcare and the economics and management thereof. When people ask me what I do, I say that I study healthcare technologies that we didn't have last century, and therefore we need to figure out how to manage them, how to pay for them, and how to bring them to market. A lot of my work these days is in digital health, and I'm excited to be part of this conversation today and help us all move the ball forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Let's start here. So you are one of the leading healthcare economists, particularly when it comes to digital health innovation. And in your work, you've evaluated a lot of aspects of this healthcare innovation, from EHRs to digital therapeutics, to evaluate like what's happening, right? What its impact is, and then what its potential is. And that's really what we're here today about, and everyone in DATAcc is about. What is the great promise? But let's be honest here, right? Innovation takes not only time, but it also takes money. And we've spoken a lot already about incentives. How do you think about incentives in driving this field forward?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And, of course, part of me, my background's in healthcare economics. I have to sort of put on my cynical economist hat. Look, we could, incentives matter. We could fill libraries with high quality, not just economic research, but health economic research that show us examples of this. We know reimbursement matters. We know incentives for new product development matter in pharma and in medical devices. And such incentives really, they take different forms. You could, lower the cost of a certain activity or increase the benefits or the returns of doing so. And we know in other healthcare product areas, like forget even the rest of healthcare, focus just on healthcare products. We know that these things matter. We know that by giving folks more information, by somehow lowering R&D costs, and just changing the landscape in which firms are asked to innovate, that we actually see changes in innovative behavior. Similarly, we know when there's a market for something on the back end, that we get more innovation. Some of the other work that I've done with DIME has actually highlighted the new reimbursement pathway for digital health apps in Germany, where we now have in Germany over 30 prescribable and fully reimbursed digital health apps on the market. So, policy incentives matter, reimbursement matters. I think, the exciting opportunities that we face today and that we face with new products is that we have a chance to rethink what do incentives mean in this context. With existing product categories, we've sort of inherited a world from the last century where we have our institutions for payment. We have our institutions, we know how to develop small molecule drugs, and we kind of go about it the same way every time. Of course, there are opportunities to use digital tools to make those processes more patient friendly and more inclusive, but the frameworks already exist. I think what's really exciting as we move into digital measurement is we have all of these opportunities now to think about new innovation processes that haven't existed for a long time and therefore might actually be more flexible than they have been in the past. And also we have opportunities to actually layer these new tools on top of existing infrastructures and actually say, hey, look, here's a neat add-on. I think that all of these are huge opportunities for us. And I think, from the health economist perspective, it's really about what can we design that actually changes the innovation landscape for the folks who are doing the innovation, whether those innovations are coming out of university laboratories or private companies or nonprofit organizations. What is it that we can do to change either the costs of doing a certain type of innovation or the rewards and the payouts of doing that? And I think there's a real opportunity here, and you're going to tell us more about that, I believe, shortly.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I like the framing of, there are the old incentive structures and what are the new. And thinking about why we're here today and addressing inclusivity, we have very compelling incentive around being inclusive, just fundamentally from goodwill, public health, we all know, right? And ultimately, these tools are about how do we do it and the why and building that business case. And with that, I'm going to drop and I'm going to share with all of you, one of the cornerstones of the toolkit for digital health measurement product development that we're launching today. It's the Market Opportunity Calculator. And this is the live website at DATAcc.org development. You can see the URL if you want to check it out. But I'm going to take you through this here. What this does is, in one place, give a product developer the opportunity to size the market and put some value around it as the first step in building a business case, like the fundamental part of the incentive structure that we're still working with here. So what we have here is you can select across major health conditions. Today, I'll select diabetes, and we have major inclusion vectors, and I'll select age. And what it does very quickly is it shows you the population breakdown, which we know. It shows you the health breakdown, which we also know. But what it provides in one easy visual is where these segments, population segments, over and under index for this health condition, which give us an opportunity to understand a choice towards impact. So that's number one. These will change dynamically as you choose stroke around household income or race. So that changes dynamically. So going back to diabetes and age. So we have the over indexing. Now this is the really cool part. If I were a product developer and innovator, this is where I would capture my greatest aim for my product. So here we have the ability to set a current level and a future level. So thinking about diabetes amongst these age segments, let's say everyone in the current tool, my current tool, let's say I'm iterating, is at 30%. And I want to create a tool where everyone will be at 80%. And I'll share an anecdote that is perfectly timely. My partner's father, who's 86 years old, wears a Bluetooth CGM, and he had to drive across the city to us last night for his son to rehook up his Bluetooth to sync up with his phone. So for him, I want to create a device that now moves us to 80. If everyone in his cohort is now engaged in my tool at 82%, everyone else will follow. What does this then show us? It very quickly gives us the delta. So how many more people we can reach through this improvement. And this we can really just capture how far we want to go with our innovation. So that's one, market size. The next is value. So here we can enter, I'll enter $110 is a per unit value. It could be a selling price. It could be another aspect of the economics that you're interested in. And what this will calculate then is to say, what is the value of this population at 30% at $110, this population in the future due to my new product innovation here, and then what is the delta? And just note that down here, these M's should be B's. So if I do achieve what I'm aiming for in my product innovation, I have potential market value of $2.3 billion. So that's, and I'll stop sharing there. And we're really excited about that. And I want to give a shout out to Mitchell Tang, who is a PhD candidate at HBS for Ariel as his advisor. And he worked with us diligently with us on this project. And it's pretty freaking cool. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to say that. So he couldn't be with us today. And I just do want to give him a shout out because he created a really important tool to help us match incentives from the larger incentive around we must be inclusive at all as table stakes, as Jen has said, and also find kind of the commercial value as starting the business case. Do you have any thoughts to share, Ariel?
No, I mean, I know that we're running short on time. I just wanted to, again, chime in with some insights from economics and just say how important information is in a lot of these settings. And, we know that in so many settings, not just, this is even just more than information, having tools, having information, is really what has the potential to change behavior and to change decision-making. So I wanted to congratulate your team on this work. Of course, Mitchell did tremendous work, but I think, as we all know, data is empowering, and having that data and being able to actually make data-driven decisions, and in this case, data-driven business decisions, is such a powerful tool. So congratulations on that. And I think that these are, exactly the types of innovations that allow us to think about new frameworks and allow us to think about how can we transform health delivery, and how can we do it, by the way, in a way that has this positive double bottom line. So
absolutely.
More, please.
Yes, absolutely. We all agree. Thank you, Ariel. Fantastic. With that, I'm going to invite up our next panelists. We have Calvin Yu from BD, Renee Kwashi from CTA, and Kristen Size from Verily. Hi. Great. Hi, Renee. Before we start our panel discussion, I was going to have everyone go through a quick introduction. Could you start, Renee?
Sure. Renee Kwashi. I am the Vice President of Digital Health at the Consumer Technology Association.
Great, thank you. And Calvin?
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Calvin Yu. I'm an infectious disease clinician, researcher, former hospital administrator. I'm currently the Vice President of Medical and Scientific Affairs for the US region for Becton Dickinson.
Great, thank you, Calvin. So great to have you here. And Kristen.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Kristen Size. I lead the study devices group at Verily. I'm actually a mechanical engineer by training, so I've done a lot of product development, and I now lead teams that work with our clinical studies platform, as well as our partnership with iRhythm.
Great, thank you. So our discussion here is shifting a little bit deeper into kind of the action around inclusivity in product development and getting into action around that. Let's start with you, Kristen. I think the timing of these tools is really great. Verily and Onduo had an announcement last week regarding their commitment to D&I. With your deep expertise, not only in clinical studies, but also in product development, what gets you excited about kind of this groundswell and the toolkits launching?
No, I think it is really timely, and I think this is a topic that's at the top of a lot of people's minds. Our mission at Verily is to bring precision health to everybody, and the only way we can do that is to meet people where they are. And people want to think that they're empathetic to other people's needs. They want to put themselves in other people's shoes, but it's only possible to a point. And so I think having, diversity in the inclusion, or in the organization, which is one of the things that's called out in that post, is sort of the first piece of that. I think in general, my experience is that people in this space really want to build inclusive products. That they don't start saying no, we don't want to. They start with good intentions, but as budgets get tight and timelines get tight, these inclusive features start to become nice to haves, or hey, we'll add that after. And I think that it gets harder and harder to do that the further you are in that product development process. So, if you release an app in English and then say, I'm going to add Spanish afterwards, if you haven't thought about how are you going to build the code, or how are you going to build the AI or the UI, then it gets really difficult even just to add that second language. And so I think, we have to be able to start from the beginning thinking about these questions. And Celine mentioned earlier PPG. That's a technology that's innately difficult, but if you start testing the development early on, you can overcome some of those challenges. And so I think these toolkits help in two really concrete ways. The calculator that you just showed, I think, shows the business value from the start. So it helps the teams continually prioritize including those inclusive elements and putting it in front of the business leaders and saying, hey, this is why it's important that we put these here. They're going to help us capture additional market value. I think the other one, which I worked on and particularly love, is the framework. I love the fact that there are questions to ask along the way and that the teams can really use those to highlight their gaps in their ability to understand different populations. So where can they not step into other people's shoes? Where do they need to go and get external input and talk to others and get data to fill in those gaps?
Fantastic. And that's really kind of the root of the framework, right? To make it as easy as possible and straightforward as possible, instead of having a long kind of encyclopedic tome addressing the issues like what's the step-by-step process. We love it. In your experience, and thinking about how do we get these in the hands of people, it's one thing for these to exist, and it's one thing to build a business case for the executives. What about incentives for teams?
So I think one thing that we've been trying to do is actually to build it into our formal development process. So requiring some of these questions to be evaluated when, say, you're developing your product requirement specification, when you're doing your user needs development at the very, very beginning, making sure that you're actually checking off the boxes, so to speak, that you've actually done this thinking and you've gone through a checklist or these kinds of questions of the framework. And so making it a requirement, I think, sort of gives people license to do the work they want to do anyway, because it's built into the overall process and the deliverables.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a great match to think about your perspective. Like, it gives people liberty. Like, you have the formality of it and the opportunity to do this great work. Thank you, Kristen. Calvin, I'd like to jump to you. You have a unique perspective with your combination of being a practitioner and now being at one of the largest global medical devices in the world. And we talked about getting too close to the users, right? Ultimately, we're here to serve the patients. I would love for you to share your perspectives on early user testing.
Sure. I think, in this process, it's helpful to sometimes take a step back and look what's common in the industry rubric and then what's common in healthcare delivery. And one of those things that they have in common is that in industry, beta testing is critical to gather insights for product improvement, but healthcare systems actually do a similar process when launching patient safety initiatives. So they pilot the first version at a particular medical unit or a few hospitals, work out the inevitable snafus, because there always are, and then they scale the program across the board system-wide. And because of the institutional practice in both medtech and frontline healthcare, there's a natural understanding that first phase products, or first phase programs, if you will, may need intentional iterative improvement in order for the final output to actually be of use. And this gets complicated, unfortunately, when the patients get involved, and we have to have patients to prove that either a product or a program is actually successful, because some patients, depending on their background or experience, may view this process as experimental research. And even worse, there can be inherent bias in the beta testing process as patients opt out because of this perception. And these patients are typically those that have had a history of actual non-consensual true experimentation. Ernest brought up the Tuskegee experiment, or populations that have been marginalized in society historically by the medical community themselves, like the LGBT population. And so, reviewing the toolkit and the resources, it struck me that providing a systematic checklist that helps evaluate key considerations that highlight unintentional bias that can be applied to race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or exclusionary thinking in general, even though it's unintentional, is pretty valuable. And so this process is actually critical, as we've seen throughout, healthcare, and particularly in my specialty, infectious diseases, fear and distrust in certain patient demographics. So I'll give you a few examples. In the 90s, where life-saving protease inhibitors made the triple cocktail and made HIV something that you could survive, a lot of patients that needed it refused it at first because of just inherent distrust. This occurred again 20 years later with hepatitis C medications, which were actually curative, not just keeping it a chronic disease, but actually curing. And similar, different patient demographics, oftentimes refusing to be in those clinical trials, or even when they were fully FDA approved. And then now we're seeing the same phenomenon with HPV vaccines and COVID vaccinations at the latest. And so, it behooves us to have a systematic process that helps developers think about inclusivity and these different points of view. So inclusivity can mean different things. It can also mean people that just harbor a different point of view, from the R&D phase through to product launch and marketing. And so we should, we can't keep on developing new products in a vacuum and then leave it at the foot of frontline healthcare providers. I've been on that side for 20 years to pick up the slack. They need our help to optimize user testing and for as many different applicable demographics as possible. And so if that process happens, both product success and healthcare delivery benefits. So it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing the kind of the historic patterns that we see, and the motivation to make sure we don't do that now, as we have this great opportunity in front of us. For the toolkit that we have in the development side, what gets you most excited?
I think, and I think Kristen sort of touched upon this. I think sort of hardwiring and embedding the sort of holistic environmental survey on, okay, you've developed a product, but have you thought of this? Or even most hospitals know what their patient case mix looks like, and so that tool that populates, okay, if you have a certain penetration of this demographic, what would that look like? And so, that's why data and accurate data is so critical, because I'll give you another example. So where I practiced for 20 years in West LA, 60% of my patients were African Americans. So if you used like a traditional, maybe 20% or maybe 15% of the population is African American, and that's what you shoot for, it's not applicable to where I practiced. And so the fact that you can actually pick and choose and tailor it to your patient case mix is extremely helpful, because we live in a very large country, and what's true in one section isn't true for another section or hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And that really, where it takes me to think about is ultimately the people, right? Going again to the people that we're serving, and thinking about, we're in this world of the consumerization of healthcare. And it's great to have you at this point, Renee, chime in, someone heading the healthcare initiative side of the Consumer Technology Association. First of all, I want to thank you. I want to point out that CTA and DIME have done a lot of work together and that you continue to push forth in the healthcare space and be part of DATAcc. So I really appreciate that. With the groundswell right now in inclusivity and equity, what is it? How would you think a consumer tech product developer should look at this toolkit, right? In order, like they're playing in a new space. Often they're playing in a new space. And, how do we make sure that they get these in their hands so they first don't make things worse, but have the opportunity to make things better?
Yeah, thank you for having me. And here at CT, really value our partnership with DIME. So thank you very much for having me on. Look, the fact of the matter is there are many opportunities to promote equity in the life cycle of the digital health solution, right? From design, technical development, to deployment of the solution in the market. And in fact, many developers, particularly on the consumer tech side, already use practices like user-centered design in developing their products. The problem is many developers often do not include diverse and inclusive set of people in the design process, right? So what you end up having is a lack of usability in certain populations, which deepens the digital divide, which fuels greater inequities, something that we always talk about. But the concern we always hear from developers, listen, equity is not my area of expertise. The known unknown, so to speak. I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to find resources. I don't know where to incorporate learnings into my product design. I don't know where to begin. Where do I find the information and resources? Well, this is a phenomenal toolkit, right? Because this toolkit really speaks to the concerns we hear from the consumer tech developers. First, the toolkit really makes the business case for why inclusive elements should be incorporated. Right? This really speaks to the business side of the consumer tech developer brain. The second, just as importantly, even if you say to yourself, hey, this is very important for me to consider, I need guidance on when in the process these elements should be incorporated, and more importantly, how to incorporate. So these suite of products really marry two incredibly important elements that I think are often missing from our equity discussions, particularly from the consumer tech developer side, which is, again, the financial case for the importance of equity, and appropriate measurement, as opposed to the idealistic, aspirational talk that I think a lot of consumer tech developers don't quite fully understand, because it's really untethered from business considerations. And then also providing a roadmap for those without expertise to start including long ignored elements of the product design and deployment. So really exciting. Finally, developers have a one-stop shop that really provides not only the business case, but really the roadmap that I think is incredibly important to consumer tech developers.
Fantastic. I love that concept, right? That we get to bridge these two things for a mindset that really has them separate. And I'm being conscious of time. We're going to have to wrap our panel up. And I appreciate Kristen, Calvin, and Renee sharing your thoughts today about the development toolkit, and really honored to have worked with you to get these in the world today.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll hand it over back to you, Shona.
Great. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, everyone. Really great insights, and really excited to see how these development products will be used as we move forward and as people learn more about them. So now we'll switch gears a little and talk about the deployment toolkit. So I want to take a few minutes to introduce you to the toolkit for inclusive deployment. You can access these from the DATAcc website. This toolkit is focused on a patient-driven approach to deploying health measurement products. We conducted expert workshops. Annie mentioned these earlier. So our experts spent 4 hours in a workshop to help us identify the greatest needs when it comes to deploying a product for healthcare or research. Our experts told us that there's a need for resources for our patients and participants and communities. And these tools serve two purposes. The first is to give clinicians and researchers some insights and recommendations on learning more about people's lives and how this can affect their use of digital health products. Some tools are a guide for developing community partnerships, an inclusive engagement plan. And then the second purpose is to empower patients and participants so they can have a more informed experience. And some examples of these tools include a Bill of Rights for using a digital health product. So this goes to the earlier question on digital tech literacy, and FAQs on privacy and security. Our experts also asked us for resources for the clinical and research team. And this second toolkit provides detailed instructions on when and how inclusive elements can be applied to clinical research, to the standard clinical research workflows. And some examples of the tools here are a digital readiness assessment tool. So again, attention to digital literacy and access, inclusive communications, because we all know how important clear communications are, and a flowchart for addressing technical issues. And then the third tool is a library of resources related to inclusivity. So these resources supplement the ones that were created by the DATAcc project teams. And this resource will be a living library. We invite you to submit additional resources. The goal for these resources is to help us operationalize inclusion when developing a digital health products. I would like to invite Amy, Carrie, Jamila, and Silas to please come on camera and help me share some more insights about these products. Sorry. Thank you all for joining us here today. You have all been very active with these projects over the past year. So who better to tell us the role these products will serve? But first, let's do a quick round of introductions. Amy, can you start for us, please?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm Amy Schoen. I have been participating in this project as a consultant to the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. My day job is as a president and digital health equity consultant through my own company, Public Health Innovators. But again, I was delighted to bring the digital inclusion world ecosystem, as Celine mentioned, in conjunction with the digital health ecosystem.
Great to have you, Amy. Jamila.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamila Jemison. I am a director of clinical development for the digital medicine team at MindMed.
And Carrie.
Good day, everybody. Hi, I'm Carrie Northcott. I am a director and project lead within the Digital Medicine and Translational Imaging Group that's housed within early clinical development at Pfizer.
Thank you, Carrie. And Silas.
Hey, good morning. Silas Buchanan. I'm with the Institute for eHealth Equity. We're a social impact consulting firm based in Cleveland, Ohio. So excited to be part of this process and this work. It's critically important. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you, Silas. Silas, you and I have become friends over the last couple of months. So I'm going to start with you. We know that having these inclusive practices in place is imperative for health equity. But we also know that it's not that simple. And we've heard about that already today with our panelists, as well as with some of the questions. But the deployment product suite emphasized the importance of community relationships and establishing trust when forging an authentic relationship. And Calvin shared some specific examples of just how challenging it is to develop trust. Based on your work with giving voice to local communities, how do you see some of these tools making a difference and helping with building trust and being an authentic part of the community?
Yeah, so, a lot of the speakers, some things that they had to say earlier were critically important. And I think folks have to go back and listen to some of the things that they shared. Calvin was spot on, as was Ernie. And Renee as well. But fostering trust at the community level is critically important, and it frankly cannot be overstated. My organization, the Institute for eHealth Equity, eHealth, as the name infers, we are concerned about an exacerbation of health disparities because of technology. So on one side, we spent a lot of time working with the leaders of underserved faith and community-based organizations, raising their literacy around the benefits of adopting and utilizing technology to improve health outcomes for individuals, families, and communities writ large. And on the other side, it's important that we work with the ideators and innovators of health tech solutions and the developers of these solutions to assure that they're spinning things up in a culturally appropriate way. So, my organization is purpose-built to leverage these tools that DIME has created. Again, honored to have been part of the process to foster the relationship between stakeholders. And because focusing on trust and hearing from folks at the community level is paramount. We are working currently with Morehouse School of Medicine, as well as a national community coalition board. It's 25 plus community-facing organizations, both secular and non. But we're focused right now on standing up ourhealthministry.com as an ecosystem of trusted faith-based organizations. We all know, right? Faith-based organizations are historically embedded in underserved communities. And they absolutely want a voice, and it's imperative that they have a voice in the development of these devices. And I think that time is now upon us. We know that underserved communities, communities of color, are disproportionately impacted by health conditions, and they do want some say so. The desire, of course, is to work both secularly and non, and the tools and guidance that's coming from DIME will allow an organization like mine and others to prepare the soil, as it were, at the community level, right? As one needs to do before you can plant seeds and expect a bumper crop. So there's a process here. It's not these things exist and then things are magic. The tools exist and then magic things are going to change. Work still has to be done. And so we're here to help do the work and carry the water to the community level. So we'll use the tools and information and guidance to make a difference by just a handful of things. One, synthesizing this information and getting it in front of the trusted leaders of faith and community-based organizations. We've already begun that. They know that I'm part of DIME, the DIME steering committee, and what we've been working on. Two, stressing the importance, right, and the potential measurable impact of their direct engagement in a process that gives communities of color and underserved communities of any color, both urban and rural, a voice in the development of these tools, trackers, devices, and applications. This is potentially health equity in action, right? This is about leveling the playing field. Third, we look forward to working with device developers to ensure that they have culturally appropriate marketing plans, right? And maybe kick the tires on collateral material to effectively reach communities of color. And lastly, it's important that we work across the board to assure that de-identified and aggregated data flows back to local community leaders. And you guys have heard me say this probably ad infinitum, but that is critically important so that they have data about the impact of work that's going on in their own communities. So.
Great. You're so spot on, Silas. We really do have to go to the trusted leaders as opposed to coming in, helicoptering in and thinking that just because we showed up, we have any authority or have trust. And that actually brings me to Amy. Health centers are also can also be trusted leaders in communities, especially for underserved populations. So I imagine that many health centers are eager to help bridge the digital divide that one of our audience members asked about earlier. And they would love to jump at the opportunity to teach people the skills they need to use digital health products. Is that the right approach? How can these tools make that approach most effective and be most valuable to these communities?
Thanks for the question, Yashoda. And I would say that no, just trying to take somebody who is not digitally skilled and may not have an appropriate device and may not have an internet connection trying to teach them to use a tool, you're pretty much wasting your breath and your time. And so what I really urge is for people to go through the resources and tune into the digital inclusion ecosystem. As I mentioned, I've been participating as a representative of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. And this is a community that's been around for 20 years. They are their own ecosystem. I'm going to drop.
Amy, you hit your mute button, Amy.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I dropped in the chat some links that you'll find sprinkled throughout all the resources, but these are some really key ones. And that is the National Digital Inclusion Alliance can help you find best practices for how do you get people connected. They have been promoting a model called Digital Navigators, and I've been working to adapt that model for the healthcare system. And I would say that this whole DIME process has really, really accelerated those efforts to make the adaptation to healthcare through the creation of these phenomenal tools. NDIA also has a network of affiliates across the country. So you can go to that link and find organizations in your communities that may have digital navigators and may have people who are already expert at training. Teaching somebody to use a digital health tool is fundamentally different than the kind of health promotion and health education that happens in healthcare and that people in healthcare are trained to do. Healthcare does not want to become expert in knowing based on your address and the numbers of people in your household and the things that they need the internet for. Here's the best internet plan for you to use, and here are the best devices for people in your household. That is not a core competency of healthcare, and you don't want that competency. Rather, you want to create those community partnerships. So look to the National Digital Inclusion Alliance affiliates. They also have national affiliates, and a couple of them I want to call out and also recognize that a number of these people are on the call today, and I want to invite you to drop your contact information into the chat, as resources. So number one is the North Star Digital Literacy Assessment and online digital skill training. And I've just worked with them to identify the competencies needed for using telehealth. Many of those competencies carry over for all of digital health. And so that's a great place rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, go to the experts in that. And second, last is a group called the Open Door Collaborative. And these are people who are expert in the acquisition of adult foundational skills, literacy skills, digital literacy skills. So, I would rather train a community health worker who's never had a smartphone before to become a digital skill trainer than trying to train someone in healthcare to train somebody to use digital skills. So I'll just stop with those. But again, these resources are embedded throughout all of the digital tools that are here. I'm sure we've missed some. I want to call on the folks that I've mentioned to really go through them and, add in links that I've missed, because there was one of me trying to represent the whole digital inclusion ecosystem.
You've done a really good job representing, Amy. We appreciate it. And a lot of the resources Amy has mentioned are in the Deployment Toolkit resource library. And you will also have the opportunity to help us build that out and add resources to that. So please share those with us as well. So we clearly have a lot of work to do with our patients and participants in our communities. But we know healthcare cannot progress without that work and without them. So Jamila, I'd love to turn to you. From the clinical or research perspective, Operationalizing digital is a complex process, and integrating steps for inclusivity adds more work. But how can this toolkit start to ensure an inclusive approach without making it burdensome?
Thank you, Yashoda. That is a great point, right? As we try to include everyone, it does change the scope of the work, right? I think the first thing you have to do is be honest, right? You don't want to pretend that this is going to happen by magic, and then most importantly, after that, you never introduce it as a burden, right? This is important, necessary work for either, if it's just digital, for you to have a successful product. If it's digital that is partnering with a therapeutic, for you to have a successful therapy. And one of the great things, it's been reviewed on this call, but it's definitely worth emphasizing, there is a way to look at the economic impact in this tool. There is a way to teach yourself how important community engagement is in this toolkit. All these things are already there for you to make the case internally. With all things, it helps if you yourself or a small group of you can be the champions, can be always reminding the folks internally at your company why this is important and why it's necessary and why it needs to be embedded in the actual practice of development and employment and deployment rather, because otherwise you are going to lose money and time during development, and you're going to lose market share, right? If you have not developed a product that actually serves everyone, once it gets out there, you may find yourself very disappointed in uptake. And so I think there's lots of ways to make the case for this being critical to your success, and therefore anything that's critical to the success is not a burden, right? It's just how fast can you get it going, how fast can you make it part of the natural best practices of your work community. So a couple of other things that I wanted to draw people's attention to that I think helps is that the toolkit is laid out with a lot of different steps. So if you already have a product on the market, there's a whole section on how to provide ongoing support. So maybe you can start there. And while you're doing that, you can have other team members sort of going back to the beginning of the pipeline and reading about the early engagement and developing draft plans so you're ready for your next launch. But I think the thing is just to be brave, start where you are. Don't all of a sudden go, I've got to get a whole nother department or something like that. No, there are individual tools here for you to take a small bite out of it, do some early drafts, and then roll it into each next product that comes along. And eventually you've worked your way all the way back to development, and it's seamless.
Yeah, so true, so true. I think you're spot on. It's like with any great innovation, there has to be a period of adjustment and learning, and the long-term outcomes will be worth any short-term disruptions. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Great. Carrie, I'd love to turn it over to you. So these products are designed to serve clinicians and researchers and can have a high impact when incorporated into clinical trial design. How do you envision these fitting in the clinical trial process, and where will these have the greatest impact?
So I want to start out as a researcher or project lead that's looking at novel digital endpoints. What an exciting time to be involved right now. I'll be honest, I get excited when I think about what I get to do, and that our team as a researcher, and we're hoping to apply these to clinician, patients, et cetera, have this opportunity to provide new insight to scientists, to patients, to clinicians, to understand diseases better using these digital tools. But I always, one of the great talks or slides that I give in my talks is we can develop the best tools, we can develop the best things, but if people don't wear them, if people don't use them, it's pointless. So this is where these DATAcc tools come into place. I can create a great tool, but as a researcher, I love the fact that we have checklists that I can go in and think about how this will apply think about the patient, think about the clinician, think about how the tools are going to be used right up front. So if I design something that sticks to your neck, you're not going to want to wear that. So I need to understand that. If I design something that wears in your wristwatch, how am I going to interact with it? There's also such great potential, I think, for the digital tools that are being developed to be used across all different types of groups, age ranges, et cetera. But again, it's really important early on to think about how to design, how to implement, and various factors along the way. It's not just the endpoint. So from a scientist or a clinical trial perspective, the tools that are being shown here allow us to think about what's the kind of impact we can make so we can choose the best tools to our best endpoints and areas to look at, provide that argument that it's valuable to do and develop these types of tools. We can also think about how we're going to engage with patients and clinicians, healthcare providers, et cetera, with these tools. What type of information do they want to know? What is important to know? Also, these tools, I was excited to see talk about how to explain this to a patient. Yeah, I want to understand your movement or your endpoint, but what am I actually gathering? I can give you the scientist answer, but you're going to look at me like I'm crazy. I want to have a nice, clear, easy way to do that. And it gives examples about how to explain this to both the patients, healthcare providers, the clinical nurses, everyone they're going to be using tools, how to use them, what you as a patient as well as a clinician have the right to know about. What are you using my data for? What's the purpose behind it? So I think what I've been excited about and seeing are how these worksheets come about and the tools that are in these toolkits that take you through step by step through this process. As someone that's developing these tools, it gives me pause and food for thought when I think, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? What's important? And think beyond that. And when I'm as we start early on the process and then carry that through, how to operationalize it, how to make sure they use it, et cetera. From a clinician's point of view, I have toolkits to understand how to explain this to my patients, how to explain it to my staff, to distribute it, bills of rights. All of these are in really nice usable formats. I know I commented earlier to the panel earlier, I was excited to see all these resources in one place because right now you're hunting and different resources are everywhere. And you can now come to one area, there's a checklist, you click on a link, it takes you to a different area to continue to explore. And it's not just on Dime's site, they take you to other resources that have been developed by other experts. So where I see these being used from start to finish, why it's important is that we have these great new tools that are being developed. Let's figure out how to make sure they're used properly and get to the right people so we can actually continue to help the healthcare industry and patients find better cures, or scientists find better cures to help patients have better, longer lives. And I think that's where it's going to be used. I can't give you one spot that's perfect. I think it's the neat thing about it, it's going to be used throughout. And I think it has accessibility and value for every type of person, how to engage with the community, clinicians' tools of how to use it. As a designer or developer of new endpoints, how am I going to use this going on? So yeah, I'm really excited and I really want to encourage everyone to take the time to look through it. I know when I first opened it, I was like, wow, this is a lot. But the wonderful part are those checklists that come about, those worksheets, they take you through it step by step and then give you those resources to learn and use all in one location.
Thank you, Carrie. I think very sage advice with starting early in the process and really being deliberate about your efforts to be inclusive and using different toolkits at different points. I actually want to throw a question to all of you that we've already heard a little bit from some of our panelists earlier this morning. And that is, it seems like every week a new digital health product is being released. But what will shift the field so that in a year, we're not so concerned with lack of inclusivity, or we don't need to be concerned with lack of inclusivity?
So I'll take a quick stab at that. So we know that communities of color and underserved communities of any color, right, are disproportionately impacted by every chronic disease, right? The morbidity and mortality rates of people of color are completely out of skew with the white population. And it doesn't matter how rich you are, how smart you are, right? If you're of color, you are negatively impacted. And so I think it's not the tooling all the time per se. I think it is how it's packaged, introduced, shared, of course, created, and using the guidance to create that tool. But a lot of it will have to do with how it is pushed out to market, in my opinion. And I think either Renee or Calvin mentioned this earlier, leveraging those voices and those folks who are known, like, loved and trusted at the community level by community members, to be, or maybe it was Ernie, to actually, introduce some of these tools from developers ultimately to community members that will use them.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of reinforce that. So in my prior life, working at the large integrated healthcare system, one of the pain points was a flu vaccine, right? And so one of the ways that we at the time increased the acceptance of that was to, we went with different groups. We went with sort of a former NBA player that was well respected in the community, and also a faith leader. And we got their buy-in on, they would be the point people in the fulcrum of a flu vaccination initiative, and we were just the enablers. And so that actually worked really well. I think it went up by 30%. So, again, that's a hardship on the healthcare providers. So if we could do that in the development phase, and even simple things, the example I gave was sort of this app where, put in your age and race, ethnicity, a lot of people balked at that. And so it could be as easy as, well, what would you be comfortable with us explaining that when it goes to public health, your PHI is actually scrubbed? So, you're actually helping your own community with these aggregate insights. In this case, it was COVID testing. Simple things like that that we can embed before the product launch that sort of helps explain in terminology that they understand and resonate with. That could be on our part in industry to help offload that lift by the healthcare providers.
And I'm going to jump in here in a slightly different direction. And I would say that the biggest opportunity we have is for healthcare and the digital medicine industry to own the problem of digital inclusion. And I'll make that clear through a parallel. And that is, immediately when the pandemic started, the K-12 educational industry, they didn't want to own digital inclusion, but they recognized that they could not sell their product, which is education, if their customers were not connected. And they jumped right in and did, it's not perfect, but there are a lot more kids who've got laptops and hotspots and connections than there were before. I kept waiting for healthcare to say, well, gee, we can't deliver our product in a high quality fashion and efficiently if our people aren't connected. So I am seeing health systems starting to screen patients for gaps in digital connectivity, recognizing digital connectivity and skills as a social determinant of health. Many health systems screen patients for social determinants of health and refer patients to community organizations to address this. So that's a fantastic infrastructure to just kind of glom on the digital inclusion needs. The emergence of this digital navigator model is really, really super promising, along with the $45 billion in the infrastructure law and the Digital Equity Act to get people connected. So in the past, if you screen people and they had a gap, there was nothing you could do about it if there was no money. Now you can get them qualified for a $30 a month subsidy, which generally means free internet and a device for every household. So there's stuff that can be done. Metrics where you're monitoring disparities in use are also key with dashboards and the like.
Thank you, Amy. We are almost running to time, but I have one question. Actually, I have two questions that I would love to close with. And so Jamila and Carrie, so Jamila, this question's come from some of your comments, but I would love to hear from both you and Carrie about it. And the question states, what are your suggestions for selling the idea of being brave and taking steps into incorporating new tools to skeptical colleagues?
Sure. I've got a few on that. I did actually just want to throw one last little thing into how do we move the needle in a year? And I think we need to sort of make this popular. And I know that can be dangerous because, people just do lip service, but I just think, if everyone at this call remembered when they were at conferences to always ask an inclusivity question of a presenter, if you can, encourage someone in your PR or media line to talk about your inclusivity efforts when you're talking about the launch of a new drug, I think as it becomes important, particularly to the people at the top and the way they're representing their product, the demand grows inside. So make it popular if you can. And in terms of being brave, so depending on who your immediate colleagues are, if you're talking to a strategist or someone who handles the purse strings in your company, money always talks, timelines always talk, risk always talks. So as we look at how important inclusivity and more really the end goal here is to have a product that actually serves everyone, letting folks know that maybe the FDA is going to say, what, how can you haven't demonstrated well enough that this is going to serve everybody. You're going to have to do another study. Avoiding that risk, which can be multiples of millions of dollars, right, is going to really click into somebody's radar. So bringing that up, I think, is important. If you're talking to folks who do a little bit more of the on the ground work, I think honestly sending them to this toolkit and having them look over the process and start thinking about how this fits into your flow and getting drafts going. And you have them read and you talk to them and then you say, hey, could you do a draft of this? We'll work on it together. And as everybody sees the value of it, it just spreads. You'll see in the toolkit that relationship building is a huge part of all of this. And so you get to practice that internally and then make it go further within your company.
Thank you.
I'd like to just add, I think depending on who you're talking to, there's different talking points. One of the overarching aspects is knowledge is power. This goes from understanding the benefit of the cost and the money, understanding the more inclusive people, and understanding from a patient's perspective, knowing more about your condition. There's so many people who just want to understand what's going on. And these digital endpoints and tools provide another piece to that puzzle. And I think explaining that and the value of being able to include more, that's also what excites me about these digital endpoints. I can now include more people. I can understand the diversity now, but to do that right, I have to engage them. I have to understand what they want to know, what types of things are important to them, and make sure I design appropriately. And I know someone in the chat said, how do you do that? You start talking to them. You have the conversations, you bring them in the thought process. You ask, hey, I joke when we look at devices, I walked up the first time and said, I wouldn't wear those 3. So let's just take them off the table. And someone looked at me and goes, what? They're great. I said, dude, they're ugly. There's parts, you're going to pop them apart. There's kind of stuff. Having those discussions, really thinking about things is really important. When I try to convince and be brave, have those conversations, call them up, ask their opinions. You may not hear what you want to hear. I've heard that a lot of times. I hear things I don't want to hear, but it's important. You learn from it, you build on it, and you continue to improve. And that's how we're going to help.
Right. Yes, definitely that air of be comfortable being uncomfortable. We all need to be there to move things forward. And there's another question in the chat that I would really love to get at. And so Silas, I'd like to throw this one at you. Have you seen community trust relationships regress during the COVID-19 pandemic? What other ways are organizations trying to build trust besides the faith-based groups? What tools have you found most effective in building trust? Or is time the only thing we have to evaluate gained trust?
Well, I don't know. There's a whole lot there. You may have to repeat that to me. I'll have to look in the chat myself so I can keep up with that question. But I do remember the first part. I don't know that I've seen trust regress because of the pandemic. It's always been fragile, right? If anything, maybe I've seen it improve a little bit. I think the technology is becoming a bit of a great equalizer, right? Prior to COVID, physicians weren't compensated generally, maybe outside of dermatologists, for doing a telehealth consult, right? Or rural physicians maybe, but you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube now, right? In terms of doing a telehealth consult and physicians being paid for it. So you drive trust. And I was on a call last night with 20 faith-based leaders and having some of this conversation. So you can drive it now, perhaps by putting a telemedicine outpost in a faith-based organization, because what's also happened during COVID was people couldn't go to their faith-based organization. They couldn't go to church, we'll say, right? Or the mosque or the synagogue, where they couldn't go, and they aren't coming back in the same numbers, right? So how do you open up these brick and mortar places that have lost some of their girth because of the pandemic, empower them with some technology that allows them to maybe invite people from the community into the doors that may grow their enterprise, which improves trust across the board. It allows people to do what Jamila said, right? Kind of meet people where they are. It allows folks to do what Amy said, or what she focused on, which was, improving broadband. And folks don't have to just show up at the dollar menu at McDonald's to get broadband. Perhaps they can do that at that faith-based organization. And what Carrie said, or what Carrie is likely thinking about, not to read her mind per se, but diverse clinical trials, right? So the opportunity to do DCTs, right, at the community level. So I think the trust is fragile, it will remain fragile. I think what DIME has done, however, with this guidance, is put us in a position where we can begin to have conversations at the community level, at the ideation stage, and that will drive trust. It will improve it.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, I'm gonna thank you all. Thank you, Carrie, Jamila, Silas, Amy. It's been a real pleasure and honor working with all of you and helping to develop these products. And thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And then I will segue us to the next section. So as we start to wrap up today, I just want to remind you of some of the things we've discussed today. So we shared some high value insights on how inclusive elements can be applied to all the steps of the development process, from the initial boardroom conversations to each step in the digital health measurement development process. The market opportunity calculator and library of evidence will help you make the business case for inclusivity. You can then take specific actions by following the digital health measurement product development process. And then the framework for inclusive development will let you identify and apply specific inclusive considerations to each step of the product development lifecycle. But we know it's not enough to be inclusive in developing the product. The product is only valuable if it's being used. So we also shared with you some insights on operationalizing inclusivity, and you heard really nicely from our panel of how to be brave and start asking these questions. We provide specific instructions and recommendations that you can apply to your work right now. The toolkit for inclusive deployment will help you support your patients, your participants, and your teams. These resources will help empower patients and participants to be more informed with clinical care and research. And the implementation tools can be applied to existing processes. And Carrie and Jamila told you some nice examples of that. And then finally, the library of resources, which Amy mentioned, it gives you quick access to curated public resources that can guide you to being more inclusive in your work. The vision for DATAcc is to achieve the promise of digital health measurement to improve lives for everyone. For our first cycle, we tackled inclusivity. And today we showed you the results of this massive collaborative effort. We want to tap into the expertise and collaborative environment of DATAcc to continue to tackle some of the most pressing challenges facing digital medicine. We're looking to all of you to guide the evolution of care and research for digital health measurement. So there is a lot more work to be done. The new cycle of DATAcc will begin in June. We welcome you to join us. These are some of the topics that can result in project work streams, and you've heard the word data many times throughout this webinar. And as you can see, there are lots of different potential work streams tackling different areas of data. These topics or challenges that digital health medicine is facing, we know these cannot be solved by one group in isolation. I mentioned earlier that DIME sits at the intersection of healthcare and technology. And the reason for this is that digital medicine is facing challenges that healthcare or technology alone cannot solve. But this is where DATAcc is most powerful. We invite you to join us. If your organization is interested in participating, please attend one of the open call information sessions. We will put this link in the chat and you will also receive it in the post-event email. We do have a few minutes, so I would love to open it up for questions. And I would invite my colleagues, Jean and Jen, to join me. So do we have, please put your questions either in the Q&A box or in the chat.
Fantastic. There was one that popped up earlier, Yashoda and Jean, that I think is really important. And in fact, Yashoda, I know you're working on a piece to document and define inclusion. In this context, can we have a rallying cry as we move to wrap up on how this community has decided to define inclusion vis-a-vis digital health and digital health measurement?
So yes, so one of the starting piece for the work that the steering committee did back, I believe in July, was to try and define inclusivity. And so we know the standards of demographics, but we also know we're talking about digital devices, digital technologies. So demographics is not enough. Socioeconomic status plays a big factor. And then we have to whittle that down to being very deliberate and intentional with digital health access versus digital literacy. And we need to really focus on social determinants of health. And so that's what the DATAcc steering committee has done, is called attention to the demographics. We know race and ethnicity has been a challenge for health equity. But there's also age, and age is a big factor as we look to digital health technologies, but socioeconomic, social determinants of health, religion, language, all of these factors play a part in, as well as physical and mental abilities, all play a factor when we talk about equity and inclusion. And so the DATAcc steering committee has put together a list that we will be sharing more broadly to help define that for people, so that we are all starting the conversation and continuing the conversation with the same language, so that we don't leave anyone behind.
Fantastic. I am so incredibly proud, Yashoda, of what you and Jean have championed with this community. It's been a delight to be watching the chat today and see people responding to, engaging with these resources right out of the gate. I think that is a reflection on what you, the 46 leading organizations that we've had the privilege to host, and all of those individuals who have been tireless and determined over the course of the last year in order to create this one-stop shop. Again, that's a technical term for, why should we be doing this work? How do we do it? Who do we need to take with us? We've learned today about the importance of being brave, of being fearless. We've learned about meeting our partners in our field where they are and thinking about value for everyone. We've learned about the fact that these tools are powerful new tools in the toolbox, but they aren't going to solve problems by themselves. That opportunity that imperative sits with each of us. So as we think about expanding your work into the upcoming year, I could not be more proud of what you've achieved. I cannot wait for the new cohort to continue to tackle some of the most pressing challenges. And I would be remiss not to pause again and thank you both for your vision, your tenacity, and your leadership. You've brought an incredible group of folks to the table. I am proud to call you colleagues. Really great work. As we look to wrap up, and we'll get folks away on time, Yashoda and Jean, I'm going to ask you each for your call to action for everyone on the line today. Yashoda, what's one thing everyone must do on the line today as a result of what we've built here?
Check out the website. Really spend some time diving into those products. My background is academic research, and I've mentioned this to Jen and Jean several times, that we talk a lot about the need for inclusion and equity, but we miss the mark on where to get started. And these products will help everyone get started right now. There is something in there for everyone to start with, and then we build on it. So my call to action is dive into the resources, get started, and then give us feedback. We have, should we share with you some links for forms for case studies and just for general feedback, as well as to adding to these resources. So I invite you to please do that.
Fantastic. Jean, of the many, many things you've done in the last year, one of them was sort of originating the tagline, moving from should do to how to. Tell everyone on the line today, what's one thing that you hope everyone responds to as a result of what we've put out into the world today?
I think it's more, I'm going to go a little meta, and it's more about mindset shift. It's all about, we have tools, and I love Jamila's statement, like just start where you are. Wherever you stop, take a beat and do a thing, right, in the positive direction. I love that. But really it's about mindset shift from this place where should do, like, okay, like we should, like what now? But it takes a mindset shift to be able to drop into toolkits, to see the questions, to open up conversations. So I encourage everyone to think about where they are now in their mindset and shift it towards getting these tools to really shift the field where we know it can go.
Fantastic. Both of your comments are incredibly important, and you've led the way with this team, this brave, this courageous team, and getting that done and setting that bar. So thank you both. And with that, Yashoda, I'll hand back to you to close us out.
Great, thanks, Jen. So on behalf of our members of the project teams, thank you for joining us today. We shared the need and value of inclusivity in digital health measurement product development and deployment, a mouthful. And we provide you with resources on how to get started and how to supplement your work. On behalf of DIME, we thank our member organizations and project team for sharing their expertise, for stimulating discussions and leadership, and especially for their commitment to bringing these products to life. A very big thank you to our panelists today. This work is only valuable and impactful with your expertise and generosity with sharing your knowledge. Thank you to our participants for joining us today. These are the conversations and work that is so desperately needed to advance the field. For those of you who are not yet DIME members, we invite you to join us. Hopefully what you learned today shows you the caliber of work the Digital Medicine Society is committed to and will immediately impact your work. Thank you and have a great rest of your week, and you will be receiving the recording and additional information in your email soon. We hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.